All right, the recording has started. All right, so welcome everybody. My name is Jennifer Nespola-Lance. I am joined today with a wonderful partner in crime, Justin Folk. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Jen. Hey, everybody. Yeah, Justin Folk here. I'm our senior manager of the email deliverability and compliance team over at Iterable. Been in the email space for close to 10 years. I was first a marketer working with some retail e-commerce digital marketing teams, and then actually hopped the fence a few years back and started supporting marketers in various professional services roles. So it's a little bit about myself.
Which is great because you have that experience on both sides to really bring to the table when we start diving in about what to consider as we start thinking about peak. So before we jump into the webinar, just a little bit about Kickbox. In case you are coming in through another source other than our newsletter, I represent Kickbox here. We are an email verification company, really focusing on being more of an email deliverability company. We've got email verification. We also have deliverability tools. And our goal is to help marketers with tools to help just supplement what they're doing with their ESPs and other mail programs. That you can also help with verification in terms of looking at that data, seeing what's valid, what's not valid, so that you can help keep your list a little bit healthier as you start to collect emails and opt-ins. And then again, we have our deliverability tools. So if you have a need for inbox placement monitoring tools, blacklist monitoring, DMARC, pre-check, if you want to sync up with Google Postmaster or SNDS, let us know and we can help you out. And so Justin, tell us a little bit about Iterable.
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, Iterable, we're a heavy hitter in the marketing technology space, and specifically at Iterable, we help support marketers send the right messages to the right audience at the right time at scale. And we do all this by using AI and our own customers' data to make those informed decisions for our customers and sending through a lot of different channels, not just email, but SMS, push, in-app. We do it all over here. So that's a little about Iterable.
All right, so for our webinar, we have a number of topics we're going to hit on. I'm sure we will go off topic a little bit here and there because there's so much that ties into all the little pieces. And we broke this into kind of it was Justin's idea, it was really great, of a science and art. So as we approach peak, and I'm glad that we're doing this now because anytime you think about peak sending, especially because we have a fall one coming up for a lot of e-commerce, you need a couple months to prepare. And we'll talk about why all of that is important and why we need that much time. But there's a science to it, kind of more the technical side of things, and a strategy around why you want certain settings and the way you have things set up. And then there's the art, kind of like who do you mail and why? And that is a little bit more nuanced. It will be a heavier, more customized for your business. So, we'll be a little bit more broad with recommendations, and what you see works for your business may be different from what works for other businesses. The science part of it can be a little bit more, it can apply more easily to many businesses. So, we'll go through all of this, and then we'll also talk about what you shouldn't do during peak, because that's also very important as well, and peak can be, the biggest moneymaker for some companies. So we're here because of peak, but Justin, can you explain what peak is? What specifically, how do you view it for your customers?
Yeah. So peak really is just a time in a calendar year where, as a marketer, you're increasing your reach for your audience and maximizing that promotional opportunity throughout the year. And it's really to benefit your brand through, at the end of the day, increasing revenue. And you think kind of the classic examples throughout the year for, classic, as I mentioned, where I came from, retail e-commerce, B2C, classic Cyber Monday, Black Friday is a classic peak time. You think for tax services or tax service providers, tax season is another peak time where they'll expand their reach. So it's really any time in that year where you're starting to increase that volume, and from email side of things, email deliverability is starting to become a little bit more unpredictable in terms of how ISPs are potentially viewing your sending as you're increasing, because it's not typically the norm with the everyday. So that's how I view peak.
Exactly. And like you mentioned, peak can be any time of the year, depending on your business. There are some businesses that thrive on Halloween. So they lead up and maybe they only have like a 2-month really sending period. And that sending period is their peak. So their plan of attack is going to be much different than maybe somebody else's. But for someone who at least is very consistent throughout the year leading up to peak, I think is an easier mountain to tackle. All right, so let's talk about the technical pieces, the little strategy that you want to keep in mind for all the systems that are mailing on your behalf. So I get some of these questions a lot in terms of how do I do IP assignment and what's my IP strategy? Can I do it on 10 million? Can I have that on one IP? Sure. Can I do it on 2000? Sure. And the answer to that, though, really depends on your business, and it varies from one sender to another. So what works for a 2000 per day or per month sender may not work for another one who has the same volume because their business is a little different. So Justin, can you talk a little bit about what you do need to consider when you're thinking about IP strategy?
Yeah, happy to. Yeah. And as Jen mentioned, it varies. There's not a single right answer for this, but there's a lot of kind of things or triggers that you can look at to see if the needle is moving the right way or the wrong way with regard to how many IPs you're sending off of. And it's going to depend on mail stream as well. You think of the classic marketing versus transactional example. So transactional, the way I define it is, those password resets, those receipt emails, those mission critical emails that has to get into the inbox for recipients. You can send way more transactional emails off of one IP than typically marketing. So there's going to be kind of a variance of IP allotment. But typically what you want to look at as a marketer is there's definitely a right and wrong answer to the number of IPs. And if you have too little IPs that you're sending off of for promotional messages, that's really going to reflect in how your messages are processing or how long your messages are processing. You might have some deferrals. You might just have longer processing times that may feed back in the events in the reason codes, and you might see those in the reason codes for longer processing times. And then also on the other side of things, if you have too many IPs, that could run into you could run into some issues as a sender as well there, because there's a concept called snowshoeing in the email deliverability space that spammers actually use on purpose. And what they do is they actually use on purpose too many IPs and sending their volume off of too many IPs. And what that does is if you divide your volume out by all of those IPs, the average volume on those IPs could be too small to establish proper reputation. And so they're trying to sneak through those filters and algorithms at the ISPs, the mailbox providers, to get into the inbox. So it can go the other way as well. There's not going to be a single right answer to it, but there's definitely brackets of IP counts that you want to kind of stay within to just ensure that you're not either going one way or the other in terms of having too long of a processing time or potentially having some snowshoeing issues.
Right. And this is really important for peak because with volumes potentially being significantly higher, that throughput is very important, especially for someone like an e-commerce that the sale is 3 hours or 4 hours. If it's a very quick flash sale or something like that, you need to be able to make sure that you have enough resources essentially that can push out your mail. But you also need to understand what's going to happen with those resources when peak is done. So when you plan for peak, you got to plan up to peak, but then what do you do after peak as well? Is that resource still going to be viable for you or not? And is there any way that you can go without additional IPs if you don't need them? And that's one thing the last bullet on here, that if you're doing really well now, you may not have to do anything about it. If you're already on the threshold, that might be a good time to consider. And this is why we have this conversation now, and we're going to talk about IP warming later on. But you need that time to set up all those configurations. So you mentioned the mailstream strategy when you talk about your IP strategy. Do you have to separate your streams? I'll throw that to you. I know it's on there, but I'm going to let you talk about it more. What is your recommendation?
Yeah, like, do you have to? No, you don't have to. But in terms of, aligning with email deliverability best practices, it's something that I recommend when I'm supporting customers and working with senders. It's just, there's a lot of volatility when you're increasing your volumes and becoming, essentially unpredictable again in the eyes of the ISPs. There's a lot of volatility there. It could go really well, it could not. And so what I like to do is really kind of support senders in minimizing the blast radius if something doesn't go well. And how we do that is create a structure, an infrastructure where we compartmentalize or silo our mail streams. I'm going to go back to the classic example of transactional versus marketing. Those are very different mail streams. The intent is very different. And so as you can see here in the green boxes, I just created a fictitious company called abccompany.com and had some siloing, recommended siloing for both the domain side of things as well as the IP side of the house as well. And so in this example, T represents transactional, M represents marketing. So from a sending domain, you have some great compartmentalization here with t.abccompany.com. That unique subdomain actually can develop its own unique reputation in the ISPs. So that subdomain is going to really take the bulk of that reputation there. And then on the other hand, m.abccompany.com, that's marketing, a unique reputation on that side. And then you have the domain authentications there with DKIM and SPF that are unique to that subdomain domain combination, all the way down through link branding. If you have an ESP that allows for you to wrap your links with your own brand, that's definitely recommended, just for alignment and uniformity, and ultimately down to the PTR records with the IPs. The domains, the DKIM signatures, as well as the IPs, they carry reputation. So you want to make sure you can compartmentalize that and reduce that blast radius. If something goes wrong on your marketing side, you're still protecting your transactional side.
Exactly. And although not all providers allow you to get as custom with the RDNS as others, whenever you can stamp your brand on it, it is recommended to do so. It makes it easier for the filters to identify that this is coming from you. And one thing that we thought was interesting is Gmail's updated recommendations. And we like to point it out because Gmail is such a big part of everyone's audience. Gmail used to say something like separate your streams with IPs and domains. Now, when you read them, and we'll send all these links in a follow-up email with the recording, they now say you don't need to separate IPs, just have one IP, but separate your streams through an address. So it's something to keep in mind. But Gmail's very advanced in what they do. A couple other providers are as well, but not every provider is as advanced as they are. So that's why these recommendations still stand true, because we have to kind of think of the lowest common denominator of what are signals that at least everybody can look at. Not everyone can get down and aggregate the same way Gmail does. So we still kind of keep that out there because this is still good information for Gmail to use as well to help their filters figure out what is happening. But they're getting to the point for their own needs to protect their customers and all the abuse that's out there that they go down as far as looking at the address that's sending the mail.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, and another thing there too is, Gmail is one of the few domains that are very domain heavy in terms of reputation versus IP, which is not the same for Microsoft, which is still very IP based in terms of assessing reputation. So it makes sense why they made that pivot as well in terms of just emphasizing much more the domain based reputation for the recommendations.
Right. And with that domain and what you had mentioned with all the SPF DKIM, this all sits in the DNS, the domain name system. That's where your authentication sits. And so the DNS is very important. It's important that it's set up correctly. And that when you think about authentication, there are some out-of-the-box solutions that you just literally put in your sending address and you go. But if there is an opportunity to brand, again, put your stamp on it, to brand parts of that email beyond just what a user sees, heavily recommended. So you can use the out-of-the-box. and send, but you'll likely be more successful if you use branded authentication. And the DNS is very important that you set it up correctly, that it's working everywhere, because if that doesn't work, your program won't work. So Justin, can you talk a little bit more about why branding your authentication is so important?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of spelled out right here, it's your calling card. It defines who you are. It says who you are in the email ecosystem and to the ISP. So we always recommend, at a bare minimum, when you're sending emails, have SPF and DKIM, set and verified in your domain host. So that's a huge thing that allows for ISPs to see, these IPs are on an allowed list to send from this domain, or hey, this is this sender's unique signature with DKIM, and we know that it hasn't been infiltrated or intercepted and inserted with malicious content or links and things like that. It's definitely, in terms of bare minimum, it's definitely something I always recommend. I think every sender should be verified with SPF and DKIM when they're sending their emails, and have them be branded.
And to top off that, when you get to do that, we've got the cherry on top, right? You can implement BIMI from that, because if you have branded DKIM, if you have branded SPF, you can now have BIMI, which are those logos that you see. And what Gmail has rolled out recently is a little blue check mark. Yahoo already does it as well. And even Apple has it, that says, hey, we've certified that they've passed all these authentication methods. So that gives another kind of visual cue, because the user of the tools really rely on kind of what's in front of them. They're not going to be digging in like deliverability people may dig in, but it gives them something there. And Gmail has this blue check mark that they have rolled out with that. You can only get that if you're properly authenticating with your brand. And there's some links in there we'll share with you guys as well. All right, so that moves into some system readiness. There's a lot that goes into this. We talked a little bit about DNS, and I'll start with that, and then we'll kind of touch on some of these other ones. But the DNS involves often another team. So when you think about getting your system ready, think about all the processes that need to happen, especially if you are changing, if you plan on adding a subdomain for a mail stream to compartmentalize, as Justin went through. You need to do that now, because I've worked with IT teams that have blackout periods. And as soon as you get even close to peak, you're done. You can't add it. Plus, you need to get all those configurations set up. But think about all of the things that you want to do and start working on them now, so that you can have enough time to, one, just get in the ticketing system, to get on their queue, and then also have enough time to test and do all the things that you need to do to prepare. So what are some of the other things you think of, Justin, when we think about getting your systems ready, and whether it's tied to email or outside of email?
Yeah, I think you brought up a great point in terms of preparedness. I think the timeliness of all this is key. So starting early, I think you hit the nail on the head there. So, if we're giving the Black Friday, Cyber Monday example as your peak, you really should start planning for that in summer. So July, August at the latest, in terms of getting prepared. I think throughput testing is huge. And ensuring that you're doing some great thorough stress testing on your systems to ensure that your systems are going to be able to handle that additional increase in volumes. And also from the data side, making sure that you have the appropriate data to begin segmenting and compartmentalizing your audience as you're doing that gradual warm up to that next level of volume, and ensuring that you have the right data points when we talk about, and we'll talk about data points here in a few slides, but just making sure that you have the right data to action on when you're making those sends is huge as well. And oftentimes, your email is just one of many channels that you're going to be sending during this time. So making sure that your email channel is working well with the SMS and the push notifications, whatever channels that you're going to be sending out or utilizing, making sure that the content, the timeliness of those sends are just planned out well in advance, so that at the end of the day, end goal is just making sure the recipient has that great experience with your brand, and it's not going to be janky or not going to be just a poor experience from the recipient side.
Exactly. And you'd mentioned, stress testing, and part of that comes for your websites too, but also your customer service. So, I've had some clients where as soon as they start sending more, their website goes down. You want to make sure that you have properly stressed that, because you don't want to go live during the most important part of your season, for whatever season that is, and have your site crash. You need to make sure if there's a customer element, your customer service team is prepared for the volume of calls that they may get, or volumes of emails they need to reply to, that they're not just prepared in terms of being able to manage their time, but are they, ready to go? Because with that, there could be other activity that's coming in that they need to be aware of. Is there any abusive activity that they need to be a little bit more aware of during peak? Although abuse happens all the time throughout the year, so it's not focused on just peak, but is the training there? Are they prepared for everything? Think about, and Justin hit the nail on the head in terms of getting your channels aligned, but not just your channels, but your inventory or whatever it is that you're offering. Is it still matching what you're promising in your emails? There's nothing more frustrating that can impact deliverability than a complaint. And a complaint can easily come about if you're like, hey, we got a really good sale on jeans, and you get to the site and they're all gone. That's not a very good customer experience. So, if you understand certain things are coming, make sure you're properly prepared for that, whatever, business line that you're in. Again, customer experience is a huge part. So whatever you're putting in your messages, again, during this crucial time of the year for you, make sure that they're clear. Try not stay away from dark patterns or deceptive messages, because that's just only going to create a negative experience later on. And that might hurt you very quickly while you're sending. And if not during peak, it can easily hurt you post peak. And, no matter what, you want to have a good program for your marketing. And then the last one on here is thinking about your sign up and the workflow there and how it's optimized. Again, setting expectations when someone signs up. What are they getting? What should they be expecting? Do they know who it's coming from? Are you protecting your data? Now, Justin talked about the data and making sure you have the ability to do the proper segmentation. But is that data also quality data? And we'll touch on this later in terms of, are you allowing your forms to be open so anyone can put content in there? And if they do, is it an address that's a spam trap? Is it an address that belongs to someone else that might complain? Are your forms getting hit so hard your system comes down? So are you protecting your forms as well? Or if somebody comes in and you don't have some type of verification tool and they type in an address and they do a typo and there's no alert that says, hey, did you mean to put this in? You have an interested customer that you potentially have lost because you didn't go back to them and say, hey, I can't accept that email. Can you try again? So those are all the things, all the ingoing to your program and all the outgoing that you have to kind of consider as you go into it. It's not just about your campaigns, but everything else that feeds into them. So let's get into kind of the art. And we teased on some of this in the previous slide, so we're going to get into it more. We're going to start with list management. I often get, I'm just going to send everybody, or can I send everybody? Yes, you can, unless, you're in a state that prohibits that due to GDPR or something like that. But we don't recommend it. So Justin, can you explain why and then how you can look at your list to better manage it?
Yeah. This is going to be a common practice for a lot of senders where, during peak time, they're going to want to reach deeper into those pockets for maybe older recipients that you maybe haven't emailed to in a while. And that, there's going to be a lot of risk there. So in making sure that as you're opening up the floodgates a little bit more with your recipients, you're being smart about it is key. And the data piece is huge there. A lot of times when you are sending to folks that you may haven't sent to in a while, that address, as an example, that address could have been taken over by an ISP or a blocklister as a spam trap. And you don't know that could have happened. Or if that address is active still, and you're sending to them and they just have lost interest a while back in the brand, there's going to be a risk there in terms of complaints, increased complaints. So there's a lot of care that you need to take with regard to reaching deeper into that pocket and being smart about it. And I think, really square one in terms of, just assessing your list health is using a tool like Kickbox and running it through a list validation to ensure, hey, we're just minimizing the risk of hard bounces or really just any address that could have been just dormant over that time. And then starting there and then getting smart with the data in terms of when they last engaged, or if you don't have really great engagement data, when they last signed up or when they last purchased, and assuming that maybe some of the more recent purchasers or recent signups could engage or could likely engage more than folks that signed up a while back. So getting smart with your data, but I really think square one which is a great one, is utilizing a list validation tool like Kickbox to ensure that you're in that top level, you're starting to clean out some of those bad addresses.
Yeah, and that can happen on a list that you already have or on your inbound leads through your forms.
Yep.
And we already talked about, what happens if you put in a typo. But I think about list management. I think often we think about list management as like something we already have, but you want to think about list management at the point of you got that email. You should start thinking about it immediately through your current list and then beyond. So how are you growing it? And is it quality? Is it decaying, and why? What were the expectations? So if you start growing during peak, do you really want all that to fall off? Because people might come in and sign up for your offers or whatever. What are you going to do to keep that quality email? Are you offering something that's going to get you a quality email? Are you going to get a disposable email that they're going to drop later after they get their coupon? So you want to think about that, not only to grow your list, but to maintain it and reduce the decay. And then how do you re-engage them? Because you might want to try to re-engage them prior to peak versus right at peak, even with a teaser of sorts, so that when you're sending to these audiences that, again, you want to focus on who they are and their quality. And a question had come in about CAPTCHA and stress testing, and that kind of ties in nicely with list management and making sure that what's coming in is quality. And the question is, at what point should I consider adding CAPTCHA to sign up process to keep bots out? Are they really a problem for signups and registration? Justin, do you have an initial thought on that one?
Yeah, I think in terms of, I always recommend safeguarding the sign up form and using something like CAPTCHA, or doing a double confirmed opt-in to make sure that your email addresses are as healthy as possible. So when I'm saying double confirmed opt-in, essentially what that means is the customer is going to add in their email address, and then there's going to be either a confirmation saying, hey, are you sure this is the email address that you want to use? And then they have to click a box, or you actually send them an email and say, hey, please confirm your email address. And so using these are huge in terms of just creating better, healthy lists and segments of lists and recipients for senders to utilize down the road.
Yep, and I think CAPTCHA should be deployed any time of the year, not just because the bad guys never stop being bad. They're doing bad stuff every day, and there's bots that look around for forms that are unprotected, and then they say, "Oh, I'm going to go hang out with this form for a little while and take advantage of it." And there's different intents behind it. Sometimes they are doing list bomb, where they look around the internet for many forms and they try to just hit them with a bunch of addresses, and there's likely some valid ones in there too. And the intent is that I'm going to fill up these mailboxes so they can't see the good stuff that they they can't see the messages that might be concerning to them, like, hey, your password has changed, where they could be like, no, it didn't, don't do that. Then there's also kind of when you think of like just a form abuse where someone's just dumping a ton of garbage in, that can just harm your database as well. And we've had a client that happened to, and they didn't notice the volume because there wasn't a tool kind of monitoring how much volume was coming into their forms, or even the quality of the emails that were coming in. So CAPTCHA helps to pull out some of that. Will it stop it all? No, but it's a great first step. You can even put honeypot fields in there to where maybe a bot would see it, but the human eyes wouldn't. So if you start to see values in those fields, you know, this probably isn't a good quality email. And then you can stop them from there and you can just take them out of your list. So I would say, if you don't have it now, do it now. And then you're good for the year until you have a new form that you then have to protect.
Yeah, and it also, it seems elementary, but also just listening to the ISPs and the signals that they're giving you when you're actually sending to recipients is key as well. So if you're sending to folks that you think are good, but you know, the ISPs are kind of filtering otherwise, you know, that's a great signal to say, I have to, you know, change things up or tighten things. You know, I always throw this quote out. It's a quote that the anti-spam team at Microsoft has said previously, and it's something I think we pretty heavily used in the email deliverability space. But basically they've said years ago that if you send to a recipient that hasn't engaged beyond 180 days, that is the kiss of death for your reputation. It sounds harsh, but it's true. And I would say Microsoft being one of the most sensitive in terms of sending to unengaged or old recipients, they really mean it, and we see it in the data a lot when working with senders. So definitely, you know, sounds elementary, but definitely just listening to those signals from the ISPs are huge as well in terms of how you should pivot or tighten as you start sending.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because right there, you know, the mailbox providers, they know their audience, they know their customers, they know they may not be reading the emails other than, like, you know, checking the filtering to make sure there's nothing malicious. But they understand when a customer is using their mailbox, when they're engaging with it, when they haven't logged in for a while, if they haven't engaged with a particular brand for a while, and maybe not all providers, but these more advanced ones definitely pay attention. And even Gmail, for example, is starting to delete inactive accounts in their system, starting this December, right around the end of the initial part of peak, the first kind of hurrah. So that, again, it's really important to understand what's going on with your database, because you might have a spike in bounces potentially if you're not paying attention to who's engaging and who isn't. I even had a client once that was like, oh, we have a list that's 10 years old. That hurt my soul a little bit as a deliverability expert. I understand why they have them. But if someone hasn't communicated with you in 10 years and you are not a brand that potentially it makes sense to have someone for that long. So if you have like very quick churn items, a 10-year-old list is not probably a valuable list to you. Yahoo can look at stuff after a year. They might consider invalidating an account. So understanding that it's not just about, we want you to tighten up for our own reasons, but there are reasons tied to mailbox providers and what they're doing to fight abuse too. And why, you know, really understanding what your customers are doing in email and outside of email is important to let you know what's a quality email, which brings us to this little section of quality versus quantity. And this is where Justin has great explanation around all this. He put this chart together, so I'm going to let him talk you through this piece.
Yeah, and when I was a marketer, you know, I fell into this as well. You know, you know, the common thought is, hey, you know, the more I can send top of funnel, the larger the number of email addresses I can get, that's going to open up the bottom of the funnel, the conversion funnel, the more reach I can have. But really, at the end of the day, that's really not going to be the case. And you kind of have to flip the whole idea of quantity on its ear and focus on quality. Quantity versus quality. Quality, even if you have a smaller top of funnel with regard to the conversion funnel, quality will actually expand or broaden and not choke as much the bottom of the funnel in terms of the conversions. And the reason why is because a lot of marketers just totally forget the dependency that we have around the ISPs and block listers. You know, those aspects of the events, deliverability events that come back where your message might be rejected because of certain things. And so, you can see here, Jen, if you don't mind kind of just quickly going back and forth from quantity to quality. So, this is, a classic funnel focused on quantity, and you have a lot of red in here. You have rejected messages that are already permanently suppressed. You have hard bounces. You have traps. You have folks, even if you get into their inboxes, maybe they haven't engaged in a while, and maybe they don't want to engage and are complaining about your message, or maybe they delete it or just ignore it. There's a lot of dependencies as a marketer. And so going from quantity to quality, that's really going to reduce the dependencies and the issues. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, increase the likelihood that you have more conversions on the quality side. So I love this example. I use it a lot, and I think it's really holds true and key to marketers.
Exactly. So let's say you have all your quality. We talked earlier about making sure your IP strategy is there. We talked about our data, making sure it's clean. We've got all that. So what do we need to talk about when we think about IP warming? Like, what is it? Why do we do it? Why do we recommend it? So if you've decided that your IP strategy, it needs a little boost and you need to add on another IP, why is this a part of that process? And why should we start now if we need to do it?
Yeah, great questions. A couple of different answers here. First that I want to talk about is, if you are spinning up new IPs, or even if you have existing IPs that the ISPs, the mailbox providers, have been used to a certain level of volume on them, and you're going to increase that volume, 5x, 6x, 7x during peak time, ISPs are not going to be used to that. That is unpredictable. They love predictability in sending patterns. And so if you have an existing IP or a net new IP that hasn't seen any volume, you want to introduce that gradually to the ISP so that they can understand, oh, this is where we're going from where you've been to where you want to go, versus just, shooting to that ultimate goal the next day after you've only been sending for, a certain level of volume. So there's reputation aspects to that from both a domain and an IP perspective. It's not just fully IP. There are, domain perspectives there as well that they'll look at with the DKIM signatures. So that's huge. And then also, again, going back to the predictability side of things, general rule of thumb that I like to take is, if you're a marketer and you're going to be sending beyond 2x of what your benchmark is or what your baseline is in terms of average volume per day, you're going to want to introduce kind of a phased gradual approach, because anything beyond 2x the next day, they're going to look at that as being guilty until proven innocent. They haven't, you haven't shown them, otherwise, and it's unpredictable for them. So ISPs are going to look at senders with unpredictable volume spikes as guilty until proven innocent. So you want to make sure that you're introducing those elements in the right way. And it's all about introducing and appeasing the filters and algorithms at the mailbox providers. And, point two is a huge one. Building good reputation on higher volumes or new IPs, it takes time. Benjamin Franklin had an amazing quote a long time ago that, it takes many good deeds to build a good reputation, but only one to tarnish it. Still holds true to email to this day. I mean, it's a quote I love because it's so true with regard to email reputation and deliverability.
I love all those things, and I'll comment on a couple of them, then we'll move on. But with the last one, it holds true because at the end of the day, you're mailing to a person, and that person tells the mailbox provider what they do and do not like. And so, and you think about there's a lot of modeling that happens with filters and stuff. And the human mind is probably also modeling, but we don't realize it. And when you start to get mail and you sign up for something, you have an expectation. And if if you're not warming into that customer relationship, and you just start slamming them hard, if you're thinking about it on a relationship standpoint, it's not going to be liked very much. So filters are very similar. Like, I don't understand what all this volume is. I don't have enough data around it. I don't understand if this is good or bad, because they have a history of you and a reputation of you. And it could go back 24 hours, 7 days, 30 days, whatever. And it's not going to go back forever necessarily. They might have something there, but they're not necessarily looking back for 5 years to be like, oh, every year they do this on this date. They're not going to be looking at that. So much changes time and time again. There's a lot of abuse that they're looking at too. And so part of warming is to help you prove that you're not a spammer, that every time you increase volume, you also have an increase in positive engagement. Because if you don't, and you spike volumes, and then who you're sending to, this is why quality is so important. If you spike volumes to those who are not quality, you're going to have higher complaints. You might not have any engagement, so those thresholds go down. So everything works together when you're thinking about warming. It's not just about volume, but everything that's tied to that. Because again, those are the customers telling the mailbox providers, is this what they want, or is it not what they want? So, which jumped ahead slightly in terms of how do you do it the right way? What is it that you need to consider while you're preparing this volume? Like, how would you recommend to your client, if it's not a new IP and they're just ramping up, what would your recommendations be for how they should go about doing this?
Yeah, again, going back to the 2x rule, I would definitely use that as a rule of thumb, depending on where you are present in your volumes and where you want to be. If it's anything above 2x, definitely want to pad in some days to get to that next level, and don't go, as you're increasing those days, don't go above 2x on the previous day's volume 2 times for that. So definitely that's a huge role. And the other thing too is going back to the data piece, being smart about who you're sending to in the increases. We always love kind of gamifying the system a bit and sending to your ultra engaged recipients that you haven't had in this cohort just yet. Or maybe, you know that they would open every single time when you send to them first and foremost, so that you're essentially telling the mailbox providers, hey, my messages are wanted, desired, expected. So you want to make sure that you're segmenting your list in a way where you start with the ultra engagers, or if you don't have great engagement data, starting with folks that are newer to your brand, that are more likely to engage or have purchased more recently, and have essentially eyes on the brands that are more present. But definitely starting there and then working your way up is huge. So pay very close attention to your data and who you are sending to out of the gate, because I think that's the most important in terms of who you're sending to out of the gate versus kind of down the line, further down the line on the warm up.
I even worked with a client where in our preparation, because they knew during peak they were going to expand. There was nothing about it. I'm going to expand, and this is who I'm expanding to. So what we did is, in preparation for that, not only because they were expanding to their audience, but and increasing volume, we thought about cadence. So one way to help get more volume was to increase how many times they mailed. But then we also thought about the audience. So we tried to create a plan to slowly introduce this audience that they didn't mail very often ahead of time. So it could also, and by doing it that and doing it slowly, it helped us kind of peel out those who we knew wouldn't want the mail during peak. It set expectations that, hey, FYI, we're going to start kind of sending again, and this is what you should be expecting. And so we were able to address warming, but then also thinking about the audience come that big send season. So we could, again, filter out to make the audience that we were mailing during peak higher quality than had they just like grabbed them all at once and sent them. So those are things you can think about as well. And can you tailor content for certain audiences if you are messaging them, and what you can send to them that's unique as well, and in preparation for this big send. I've seen a lot of teaser emails, for example, go out, but really think about what they want, and how they can also get off your list if it gets to be too much.
Exactly.
So part of this, Justin, making sure you're successful, you have to measure it in some way during peak. So how do you recommend senders use their metrics to make sure that they're on the right path, or that what metrics they're looking at can help identify like when they need to scale back?
Yeah, great question. I think both the engagement and deliverability metrics are huge. When I talk about engagement, we talk about the opens and the clicks. And then also on the deliverability side, I mentioned before, listening to the signals of the mailbox providers. They, in their feedback loops, give a lot of great information. You think about the examples of soft bounces. So if they temporarily reject your message, there's actually really great insight and information in the soft bounce reason codes, where it could be, maybe just something technically that was an issue. Maybe there was a timeout with the connecting server or the receiving server and sending server. Maybe there was a timeout issue, or it could be reputation related, where your IP might be on a blacklist, or you might be hitting them too fast, where they're throttling you. A lot of that great information lies in the reason code. So reading those and understanding the origin of the issue is huge. And you can get great soft bounces, soft bounce reason codes. Hard bounces are typically what they really mean is just a bad address that will bounce back every time. Spam complaints, I know Gmail doesn't provide, and some of the smaller mailbox providers don't provide feedback loops for spam complaints for privacy, but a lot of them do. And that is a really big one to look at and think about. So if your spam complaint or spam report rates are above a certain threshold, you're going to need to pivot the content or pivot the audience or frequency. So there's a lot of great strategies, but look at all of the metrics, not just engagement. Engagement is just a piece of the pie. Look at the deliverability side of things as well. I always give this example of, delivery and deliverability are not the same. Delivery is an accepted message from the mailbox providers saying, hey, you got a 250 level response or 200 level response saying that we've accepted. That doesn't mean that it went into the inbox. And so there's a lot of other metrics that you need to look at to ensure that your messages are hitting into the mailbox you want.
Exactly. And with all of that, look at your trending over time too, because, some might bring up the Apple MPP. I'd say just stop worrying about it for now. If you're seeing opens, that's a good sign. If you're not seeing opens, something happened. And then you need to research. And is it spam folder placement? Is there a problem with the reporting? That's when you have to research. But the fact is, if you're trending for every metric, what are you trending? And when are you seeing elevations and dips? And does it stay down? Does it stay high? And those are the things you need to understand. Is there an FBL that broke that you need to reapply for? Because you don't want to lose those. You want to keep those going. Is there a change in volume that you didn't expect from streams that really are kind of low? And you're like, that stream should not increase during this time period, or this one should. Look at all of those things, because it can help identify when something has broken, or if there's abuse happening, or if just something is just not performing as expected, because the numbers aren't just telling you this is how you perform, but you should use them as a tool and impetus for action on them. Take your learnings and then do something with them, all the way up to peak, all the way through peak and beyond. So as we talk about the metrics, we talked a little bit about, you already started touching on some of these already, but if you had to pick like two from each side that a sender really should, if you can, focus on as much as you can. The ones in bold are the ones that are in your campaign reports. So what are the ones that, for what a sender sees, that they should really focus on during, like, leading up to peak and moving into peak and beyond?
Yeah, I think on the good signal side, open rates are key. And the reason why I say that is, again, mailbox providers, unless you're doing seed testing and have more accurate understanding of what inbox you're hitting, mailbox providers aren't going to provide feedback loops to say, yes, you made it into the inbox, or no, you made it into the spam folder. A way to back into the assumption that you're either being filtered or not is through opens. In the example I give, like maybe over time, maybe your Gmail and your Microsoft have been at 20% open rates, but Yahoo is at 4% or 5%. there's something weird going on with Yahoo, and it's likely not just because of, hey, our Yahoo recipients aren't finding our messages meaningful and they want to engage. It's likely that they're just not seeing it. They're not seeing it because it's in a different folder than the inbox. And so backing into that is great in terms of just ensuring that your filtering is optimized and everyone is kind of on a similar playing field in terms of those opens. And in terms of the bad signals, I think the spam report rate, that is a harsh, really harsh. And in terms of weight, that's weighted very heavy in terms of filters going not the right way in terms of viewing you as a sender. And, as you all know, ISPs, mailbox providers, they all have their own way in which they filter in their own algorithms. They don't share that secret sauce with each other. But one thing that I've seen in my experience is that if you're trending as a sender above a 0.08% spam report threshold, that's going to be pretty much across the board an issue across all the mailbox providers. They typically have used that threshold as their stance. So they are very much aligned there. So I would say spam complaints are a huge one to look at in terms of bad signals.
And, I said, don't worry about MPP, but the thing to take from there is that every metric you see in your campaign reports are probably skewed in some way or other. And your spam complaint rate, it looks really tiny to be 0.08%, but that is only from a small subset of ISPs that provide feedback complaints. Gmail is not one of them. So if we were to actually get those complaints from Gmail, your 0.8 would be much higher. So you have to think about, although it looks small, it's actually much higher than what you're seeing in your reports. So we're going to talk quickly about what not to do, because I knew it. We got lots of talking time. So what don't you want to do during peak? And then we're going to, I believe the last slide is what you want to keep in mind.
Yeah, so in terms of don't do, I would say the biggest thing I want to highlight here is just overwhelm them. I think, Jen, you made a great comment in the past in terms of content and cadence. Overwhelming is huge. You want to set proper expectations up front for your customers of, hey, thank you for signing up for a program, or, hey, we're about to, with the teasers, we're about to, embark on this promotion. This is what you should be receiving in the near future, how often. Just setting the proper expectations are huge, and not to overwhelm them. Email fatigue is real. Even if you have an active subscriber, but the expectations haven't been set on how much they'll receive, they could go from active to inactive or even complain and just be done. So I would say overwhelming them is the biggest thing I want to highlight here with regard to don't do.
Yep. And I'd say testing is always a good thing, but don't go crazy with your testing in terms of, like, you don't want a big redesign. You don't want brand. That peak is not the time to do it. You should be doing that leading up to, or just some other season of your send cycles. So in the last few minutes that we have, some great points here, Justin, that I know you have. So I'm going to let you kind of take us through your takeaways here.
Yeah, I won't, in the interest of time, I won't touch on the sub points, but really there's just 3 things to consider as you're making sends as a marketer in email. Number 1 is equate your marketing lifecycle to a real relationship. Like, it's organic. It shouldn't be forced. It's organic. It's a 2-way street, not just a bike lane and a highway. It's an equal 2-way street. And yeah, that's huge. And you have to be okay to say goodbye to folks. There's going to be times in the life cycle where you have to be okay to say goodbye. Number 2 is consider each send as either a debit or credit to your sending reputation. And that is really true. Every single time you send, that will be for your reputation or against your reputation. Reputation isn't a set it and forget it thing. You want to always have your ear out for the metrics. You want to understand what is happening, responses from recipients and the ISPs. And then finally, just in terms of the infrastructure side, clearly distinguish your different mail streams in your infrastructure. You want to reduce that blast radius. And so when you're kind of going through that exercise, you should ask the question, does this email benefit me as a sender, or does it benefit the recipient? And that's really how you can start sort of siloing and compartmentalizing your mail streams to reduce blast radius for sending those promotional emails to protect the other streams that you have.
Love all that. And one thing I like to think about when you have a credit or debit is, sorry, family members in the back. It's not just a debit or credit against your sender score with the mailbox provider. They all have their own view of you, but also with your customers. And they're the most important part because they're the ones that, it's the whole point of the email is to send to them because you want to have that relationship. They want something from you, you want something from them. So make sure you're mailing in a way that you're constantly giving a positive for them. So if you have questions for us, because I know we went, I think, a minute up to the very end before we could get to Q&A, please let us know. We've got our contact information for both Kickbox and Iterable here. If you have questions about just deliverability services or Iterable's application and tools that they have available, or Kickboxes, please reach out. We'd love to hear from you. And then we don't have time for much Q&A other than maybe one or two questions if anybody wants to throw one in. But if not, again, we will send out the recording to everybody. And we want to thank you all for joining us today. And thank you, Justin.
It was a pleasure, Jen. Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Thanks.
Excellent. Well, I don't see anything coming in, so have a lovely rest of your day, and be on the lookout for other communications from us. We'll send out an email soon, wrapping up this webinar and all the links within it. Have a good one.
Thanks all. It was a pleasure. See ya.
Bye.